Okay, so it'd be good to start with some of, I know you've been very busy, quite a lot of news announcements in the recent past. So if we can start with some of those. And first up, perhaps I think you've announced you're going to be doubling your manufacturing capacity for, I think, switchgear, busways, and is it integrated modular solutions? So yeah, just thoughts as to why you're doing that. Obviously, I guess it's for a good reason, but yeah, just why that's occurring.
No, absolutely. So I think it's quite commonly known that there's a big boom in the industry at the moment. So we see kind of AI conception, interception coming in to the industry, and I think that's something that, from a business point of view, there's been a huge investment with regard to what we're looking at doing with regard to the scaling up of the facilities and looking at especially the switchway, the busway, the integrated modular solutions. When we acquired the E&I business a couple of years ago now, there's been a huge investment in that area of the business as well. So we've created around about 1,000 additional jobs for that particular element of the business, and that's all off back of what we're seeing in the industry at the moment. We're seeing kind of the boom coming from the NVIDIA GPU, CPU discussion, which is going around the industry. I think there's a huge amount sort of out there on the public forum to look at with regard to that, but obviously the data and the amount of data being used every day is increasing, and then there's the artificial intelligence element to it as well. So we're seeing hyperscale clients, which is driving that, and we're seeing some kind of startup AI clients as well that are coming into the market, which is really interesting. So we see the normal sort of co-location market, general co-location market, and then there's this additional AI element, which I think we're seeing traction in the US, and we're starting to see traction in EMEA now as well.
Okay, yeah, I'll ask a bit more about AI later on if that's all right. But for now, I mean, another thing, I think you've announced that you're opening a manufacturing facility in is it test labs, I think, in India. So again, some more expansion. So again, if you can just explain the sort of the why and the where, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have three regions basically. So we have North America, we have EMEA, and then we have the Asia Pac region, which including India. And there's been a large number of co-location providers going into the Indian market. So there's a few. I'm not going to go through the names, but there's a lot of research out there with regard to the joint ventures that are going currently into the Indian market, and there's a large expansion plan that we've got in place basically by the new facilities offering the testing. So obviously with any critical piece of infrastructure, the testing is very important. So there's been investment with regard to the testing laboratories as well in that. The development of the thermal portfolio being built in those particular factories as well in India. So we manufacture in region for region. And the reason for that is basically that you've got the in-house research and development element to it. You've got the capability to manufacture the product in the region. And obviously within India, there's import duties as well, which is worth considering with regard to building in region for region, certainly for that particular market. So yeah, so from a point of view, investing in the regions where we're seeing the most development and the most gain, India would be certainly a big development point for us as well. And that would actually supply the Asia Pac region as well. So that those particular factories currently provide product for that particular region built out of India and exported as well.
Okay, and continuing the sort of the busyness of the company, I believe at the end of last year you acquired Coolterra, and perhaps if I can link it together, you're also doing some work with Intel around liquid cooling. I think so. I think they're both in that liquid cooling space. So again, it's no secret that with the I guess the densities of the sheer compute power, etc., liquid cooling is becoming more of an option. But just to it'd be good to understand the Vertiv approach to what's going on.
Yeah, no problem at all. So the rack density is the reason that we start to look at liquid cooling. So I started in the industry about 12 years ago now, and we were designing at say 2 or 3 kilowatts a rack. And I think the general concept of rack design, or certainly airflow and rack design and CFM over airflow, stayed at around about 7 kilowatts a rack was the general design standards. And now what we're seeing is that compute power from CPU, GPU go up significantly. We're seeing rack densities now of 50 kilowatts, which are being designed in a standard air-cooled solution with like a rear door heat exchanger. But the move with regards to the Cortera portfolio was the CDU, so the direct to chip cooling as well, as the rack manifolds that come on board with that, as well as all the cooling distribution units. So taking basically direct liquid to chip, which is something that's coming up when we're looking at, say, 70, 80, 90 kilowatts a rack. And that's based on the amount of processing that's done at that level. So the reason that the industry is moving in that direction, and we're still, as we mentioned earlier, with regards to the discussion, we're still seeing the 7 kilowatts a rack in a colo place, but we're certainly seeing a huge demand at the moment for higher density rack applications. And when we start to look at that, and when we start to look at the Cortera acquisition, it gives us an additional element to the portfolio. So we've always been able to offer the cooling units and the rear door heat exchangers. It's a very, very good additional element to the portfolio that we took on when we acquired that particular business. And it's all driven off the back of this very high density kind of machine learning and AI as part of it, which is something that we do absolutely see at the moment, which is the development of where the industry is going. And it's quite a change in the industry. If you think about where we were at 7 kilowatts a rack or 3 kilowatts a rack, that probably took 8 years to develop over that period of time. And then we're seeing at the moment the rack densities and designs and design developments coming down. That's a very, very steep increase from where we were previously. So the portfolio that we can offer has to mirror that. And that's obviously what we take to the market. And the Cortera acquisition gave us that additional ability to do that, and the additional capacity as well to develop that solution and deploy it.
And just on the work, I mean, I suspect you can't tell too much, but just the work you're doing with Intel, is there anything you can share as to what's going on there?
So we're working with a number of the server manufacturers and companies around that particular space. So there were some very, very good discussions with others as well, and there's some work going on. I can't talk too much about the Intel element, but I can give you a broader picture. Obviously, when we're starting to put water to chip, there's more discussions around about, and that partnership between the IT space and the critical infrastructure becomes a lot closer. As an example of that, traditionally we were dealing with the mechanical and electrical contractors with regards to the deployment of the equipment. But as soon as you're bringing liquid into a data center and you're working then closely with a rack, with a server, nearer the storage devices, you're in that position where you're working very closely with those particular businesses. And that is something that's very key to it, because when you're designing the product, you're obviously interfacing them with the chip or with the server itself. So there's been a lot of development done by our research and development teams to work very closely with a number of key companies to develop a solution that will then be a good match and compatible basically with the particular applications that we're running into the future when we look at this high density heat load.
Okay, so already what you're doing is sort of mirroring where the industry is going in terms of the, some of the hot topics. And I guess another one is, well, perhaps even the main one is sustainability. And I know again at the back end of last year, you introduced some prefabricated mass timber solutions. So just again, be good to understand thoughts as to why and what you've actually, what's on offer, as it were.
Yes, that's really, really interesting, because if you look at the concept of a timber mod is what the branding we're using. This is what would be known in the industry of an E-pod or a power module. So it's a containerized, modular building basically that's being used. It came from a containerized initial, but they moved into modular buildings, and certainly all of our buildings that we're building are prefabricated modular buildings which are custom built for it. So the industry moved away from where people were using a kind of container into now a modular building, a pre-designed, pre-constructed modular frame. And then the development is a sustainability element. So the CO2, the embedded carbon, the renewable element to it as well. So the design development of that was off the back of looking at all of the sustainability elements. And going down the timber route isn't actually new. There's companies out there building data centers out of timber. But going down the route of using that for a prefabricated piece of equipment or a product as we see it, and the timber mod and the E-mod as we see it is a product portfolio offering. It's a very, very good way of looking at reducing your CO2, definitely your carbon, and ticking a lot of boxes with regard to renewable as well. So the whole design development behind that was built around the sustainability element. Taking that as well, when you look at actually the fact that when you're building in timber and you're planting reforesting at that stage, There's calculations done, and I don't have it off the top of my head, but basically you can actually build the buildings and you won't be taking away, as long as you're replanting and reforesting at that position. It's renewable as well, so you're not actually taking away from the environment, where when you're obviously taking metals out of the environment, you're in that position as well. So there's a huge amount of benefits to that as well. There's some really, really good studies done as well with regard to the amount of CO2, the amount of embedded carbon within that as well. And that's all information we can share at some point moving forward. But from our point of view, it ticks the box from sustainability is a big banner, I suppose. But it also ticks the box from a renewable point of view of where we're giving back to the environment. And there's those elements which come into the particular timber mod.
I mean, any thoughts as to how big, how much of the market it could take in time, or is it a nice to have for companies, or do you think at some stage big colos will say timber only, or are we a little way away from that?
I think it's really interesting, because I think if you go back 10 years, everyone used to talk about sustainability, and it was just a tick in the box, I think, at that time. There's been some huge movements over the last few years to actually look at the embedded carbon in the supply chain, to look at the embedded carbon in the sub-supply chain as well. And it's now a prerequisite for a lot of companies. When you're talking about supplying to companies, there's a prerequisite to make sure we have a sustainable offering. I think there's definitely the market out there now for sustainability, where companies are selling and using that as one of their offerings. And that seems to be where the market's changing at the moment, where before it was we have to achieve this. Now we actually want to achieve this to offer maybe a unique selling point to the market, or to show something with regard to the sustainability of the company, which is a driver for businesses. And also it's one of their goals is to become more sustainable. So if you're talking about one of the large hyperscale clients wanting to be more sustainable, reducing the amount of metal within the building is a huge way of doing that. And these aren't small incremental gains. These are big areas where you can make a dramatic improvement very quickly as well. So the interest in that, you can imagine the interest in that is quite high with regard to the timber mod itself. And it's one of those products that comes to market when you start thinking about it, that it's actually out there a little bit more than what the standard incremental gains are. So I think from sustainability, absolutely. I think you will find that buildings, general buildings, you will be seeing that something that is that is replenishable as well, rather than taking away from the environment itself. And I think we'll see that from a sustainability point of view, they'll push forward with regard to making sure that certain elements of their design and build are actually incorporating maybe not just the standard building materials, but the newer building materials as well, which offer sustainability.
Okay, and perhaps a different angle of sustainability. Again, last year, I think, end of Dynaflex, the battery energy storage system. So I know that's just in general life, it's a big area, but for the data centers, be good to understand, say, the reason behind the launch, and any thoughts you have as to things like peak shaving, etc., just around energy storage and data centers, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think everyone knows that data centers use power, and they use quite a significant amount of power. And then what we're looking to do is, from a power center point of view, we're looking to not just look at what is a UPS system or what is a switchgear system. We're looking to make a power center which is incorporating any elements which can make the power usage either renewable as well, but incorporating different elements where there's a use to storing that amount of power. So a traditional data center will store power in batteries, but that use is only used when there's a power outage on it. So there's a system there which isn't being used to very effective use. So you have grid stabilization to start off with. So as you add renewable energies into the grid with regard to wind and solar and other elements that come in, there's a grid stabilization element which comes into the BESS system. So we have a battery system which is basically offering a grid stabilization to it, and that's done by a UPS system. Then we look at the whole Dynaflex battery energy system, and that's where we start to then incorporate the solar element into it. And it's actually then pushing down the fact of the renewable energy, or the renewables, and the sustainability as well, because there's design development then about, do you need generators? Because you have a battery backup system which is being used, a mass scale battery backup system, which is being used for the grid stabilization. But for the grid stabilization, you would hold a lot more held up capacity than what you would in a normal UPS system. So then we can use that and basically incorporate the renewable energies into it. So we're looking then about, like we just covered really, you've got the wind element coming into it. So not only are you looking at grid stabilization when elements of sustainable energy come on, so if you're moving from a traditional power station over to a wind or hydro system, there's fluctuations within the grid at that stage. So we're using the battery backup systems in there to be able to offer that grid stabilization. And it's the supply and demand really. So the balance between the supply and demand within the grid, then we're using the battery backup systems to be able to give us that stability. And the whole energy center is something that's incorporating that. So we're using smart control within the systems themselves to balance that. We're obviously always guaranteeing that the data center itself has enough stored capacity to be able to act still as a backup system if we have a power outage on it. But we're using that extra capacity, which is not required all the time, because maybe the data center isn't fully loaded, or maybe we've decided to over-design that to give us a larger stabilization and actually export back into the grid from the UPS systems to actually give us a financial gain as well, which is something that's being used, explored and developed basically in some of the countries. And there's some really good incentives as well for export to grid and export from grid basically in the right times, and when the grid actually needs power, export in to the grid, and then when the grid needs stabilization, we're then using the battery system to offer that stabilization as well. And then the sustainability bit, I think, just to kind of top and tail that and cover it, you've got that sustainability bit where the generators are only used for a short period of time generally, and rather than having generators, let's use something that's sustainable, that's not burning fuel as well, and can be used for a second use or maybe a primary use. And the actual second use is what we're looking at with regard to the data center itself.
Okay, and the final sort of news thing before we just look a little bit ahead, I think that you've made a bit of an investment in Northern Ireland as well. So if you can just expand on what's gone on there, that'd be great.
Yeah, we lightly touched on that at the beginning of the conversation, Philip. So we'll just expand maybe a little bit on that. So when we acquired the E&I business 2 years ago now, there was a large demand on the factories in that particular location, and those factories are satisfying a large, vast EMEA region at that time and exporting as well to some other regions. So it was deemed that the skill set with regard to the Northern Ireland facility and the switchgear, LV/MV switchgear facilities out there, as well as the busway that we make and the IMS, which is the Integrated Modular Solutions element, it was deemed that the investment into there would be deemed the right decision to make. So it was announced that we're investing into those areas with staffing as well, but looking at additional capacity as well. And that's what we covered at the beginning of the conversation. We have seen an increase in demand, but we also see that there's a future increase in demand as well. So we're building out for future capacity. We're building out future training as well. The area there is very key. So there's a link with the local universities and the way that we bring people into the business. And there's a circular economy element to that as well with regard to that local particular area where we're building that particular factory environment that we have within those 3 factories that we have. So we have Derry, London Derry area, and the Campsie facilities as well. And the skill set that's transferable and the skill set that's able to be able to build up in those was something that was deemed by the business as a really good investment moving forward. And that's why we've invested in additional people and additional elements to build the capacity up in that particular location.
Okay, and so before we finish, it'd be good to look a little bit ahead. And you've already talked quite a lot about AI, but as one of the opportunities and challenges for the industry moving forward, I just wonder, I don't expect anyone knows, but do you have your own thoughts, or does Vertiv has a position as to just how transformational, radical, whatever you want to call AI is going to be? Does the industry know what's going to hit it, or do you think a few people are, if not complacent, haven't really understood the demands that AI may well place on aging infrastructure, or the speed at which you can build new facilities that are clearly better able to cope with the loads?
I think when if you take a step back, and I forget how many months ago now, obviously ChatGPT was a big AI boom. So I think when you look at the conceptual and inceptual curve of how things are implemented in various different areas in life, not just in data centers, but I think there's a huge amount at the moment of investment coming in AI. When that comes and how that comes, I think we haven't fully seen yet. I think we are starting to. I think Vertiv as a business is investing in the future and definitely investing in that coming. But I think at the moment what we're seeing is a huge amount of business development activities based on AI, and that just isn't what we're doing as a company. That's going all the way through the particular data center industry. So if you look at the hyperscalers and then you look to co-location all the way through the industry, there's a huge drive at the moment to understand what the AI boom looks like, when that will land, and that is happening currently, and we see that happening more into the future. But trying to kind of say how much will it be or where will it be is a very difficult situation. There's obviously the partnerships that we have, as we mentioned earlier, with some of the hardware, so IT hardware manufacturers as well, and they're seeing it at the front end. So they're seeing the inquiries from the clients, but then fitting out those particular locations as well. But from our point of view, we believe that there will be a significant increase with regard to supply that's required. And then coming off the back, I suppose, of where the whole industry was a few years ago with supply and demand constraints, it's about getting out first, building capacity now, building the skill set now, building the services as well. There's skill set that has to be deployed, not just at a factory level, but at an actual commissioning level on site. So with regard to investment, the business, we're not just investing across, shall we build out additional capacity in the factories, we're also investing in service engineers on the ground. So when we come to commission the systems, or when we come to offer the critical support at the back end, when the product's been commissioned and deployed, we have the ability then to scale the business sufficiently across all of the different offers. So we have all the different line of businesses where we can provide the product, the factories which are then building the product, the direct management as well of other elements. So when we're building out the company, we have to build out the front end support structure with regard to how we manage the clients, not just the actual demand. The demand doesn't just come to us. We have to manage the demand. We have to manage the clients. We have to manage all of the different factory locations and the demand through the factory. But as well, we have to manage the whole element of new build facilities. But we also have to manage the fact that some of the legacy facilities will need to be updated as well. So there's an element of in-region support with regard to commissioning and service engineers, but also there's an element of clients will be looking to refurb 10-year-old data centers as well. And what that looks like with regard to the smart way of doing that, with regard to the power input of the data center and all of those elements, I think the ability to just build new greenfield sites on new land is something that soon becomes a problem. I think everyone in the industry knows that the biggest constraint at the moment for anyone looking to build is probably land and power currently. So when you start to look at existing facilities and you start to look at the way that the existing facilities, the brownfield sites that need regenerating, and how does a brownfield site incorporate AI, shall we say, into it, or high density cooling into it, or high density power, it's then looking at like the utilization of the power string. And that then drives us down a design development on making the product the most efficient possible as well. So there's kind of two ways to look at it. Yes, the AI machine learning boom is definitely coming, but when you get down to a more conceptual element of how will that be deployed in various different regions around the world, we have to then look to not just on greenfield, but obviously look on the brownfield side as well.
And also energy storage, which again, you earlier in the conversation you talked quite a lot, but I'm just wondering, in terms of the future, do you think the data center industry, it strikes me they're a little bit nervous of it at the moment. Is it fair to say that the technology solutions are available, but as I say, a lot of data center owner operators are just tad nervous as to the implications and how to deploy it? Or is there still some technology needed to be developed in order to give them the confidence? Just your thoughts as to, you know, the potential, I guess, for energy storage and what are the bottlenecks, if there are any, if you like.
Yeah, and you mean sort of more granular energy storage, so with regards to the battery technologies and the elements around that and the way that that system then incorporates in. So we've I've certainly seen every deployment when I first particularly joined Emerson, which was then the Vertiv business moving forward. That was all VRLA batteries, so lead acid batteries at that particular time. And there has been some significant developments with regard to lithium ion deployments as well. Some regions stronger than others, actually. We see some regions actually actively using lithium ion, and that might be a driver of space, that might be a driver of weight, that might be a driver of just that particular region, and the inception of that is quicker within that particular region. So obviously we talked about the regions, we talked about, we have the North America, we have obviously the Asia region, Asia Pac region, and then we have the EMEA region. I'm particularly focused within the EMEA region, but I know other regions have seen lithium ion being used a lot more. We're also seeing zinc batteries as well as another development point. And there's a lot of work being done with regard to the systems and the UPS systems and the switchboard systems to make sure that all of these different battery technologies integrate with those particular products as well. But from an industry point of view, there was a significant move to lithium ion batteries. But then there's the sustainability element which comes into it as well. And there's obviously those discussions around about how safe are certain battery technologies within certain environments. And different operators have different views on that as well. So we've definitely seen battery technology take a leap forward in the years, but there's various different areas which prohibit certain battery technologies in certain areas and certain buildings, and certain clients don't want certain battery technologies. Maybe it's too new, maybe it's conceptual rather than being implemented and there's not enough time period it's run. Maybe it's space saving that they're looking for, and that's driven off of a CapEx model. So they'd be more intent to go down that route. With regard to what we're doing with regard to the FES technology and the way we support the grid that we covered earlier, there's certain battery technologies that we have to use for that particular application. So when we start talking to clients about that, we're also talking as a complete wrap about what are their goals, what's the sustainability element to that, what's the driver, and that generally takes you down that discussion route about which battery technology would be the right one to use, and also what are they looking to ultimately get out of that further down the line. Are they looking to integrate solar, wind, and the other elements to that? Are they future-proofing the design? And I think everyone knows some clients are more risk averse and some are more conceptual and want to go down the design route as well. So we're definitely seeing a huge amount of different inquiries with regard to how the technology works, the battery technologies. The Dynaflex system that we're operating as well is taking that into consideration at the front end.
Okay, and one final thing I think that you hinted may be becoming more of an issue is that enterprises are going to be relying on services for flexibility into the future. Again, if you can just sort of flash out what that would look like.
Yeah, so I think everyone's looking at the life expectancy or lifetime at the moment of what the product set offers. And that's not just looking at the front end life expectancy, that's looking at how long can we operate this particular product in the environment that it is. When we see a demand, lead times increase as well. So when we're doing capacity planning and when we're doing replacement product planning, there's a huge service element to that as well. So with regard to the right service offerings that we have, with regard to how we can deploy service offerings to extend the lifetime of the installed base as well. We're using enhanced methods to understand the client's load with regard to how we develop that particular service offering for that client as well. And that brings us kind of in that circle really about, we were talking about earlier, are we going to build a new site or are we going to refurb a site at that particular time? And I touched on it earlier just to kind of be in a position where the development of that and the way that you're looking at the different ways of looking at the scope 3 emissions and the various different points that go into that. If you're not replacing product, then you're not taking that element into consideration. So there's a good development path with regard to how that particular initiative and the sustainability side all tie together as well. That long gone of the days of where you replace batteries after 4 years just to give you some reliability. So there's monitoring now of battery cells to understand the condition of the battery cells. There's elements of where we're monitoring all of the systems with regard to the remote monitoring elements as well. So there's a lot of understanding of how that particular system is working, and not just saying the life expectancy on that system is 10 years, so we have to replace it at 10 years. So we can do health checks and capacity health checks on the unit, which gives us a benefit as well. So ultimately, if you take it through the whole path, you're not affecting the sustainability element at the top end, because you're not then having to take raw materials, i.e. metals, from the ground and then process those, so you're not building a worse sustainability case. You're looking at how the sites can operate for longer as well. So you're then reducing any of the manpower that's going to become difficult as well on site. The product supply doesn't become an issue. So trying to extend that product life cycle through the service element is something that's really, really key as we move forward.
Okay, well, I mean, we've covered a fair amount of ground. Are there any other sort of opportunities or challenges you can see in the future for the industry, or have we covered most of the main ones?
I think the prefabricated modular route is something that's a really big key one, because when you are building new, the time to deploy, the speed to deploy is a very, very key one. So something that we've seen a lot of, as we were talking about earlier, the terminology we were using was the E-mod or the E-pod, which regards the modular building, which is pre-constructed offsite. But the time to deploy and the speed to deploy and the continuity of labour as well. So we're seeing, with regard to the facilities we have that build those particular offerings, we have the Northern Ireland facility, we have the Croatia facility, and then we have the offering that we can also integrate some within the RAC facility in the UAE as well. For EMEA, we've got an extensive offering for that particular product offering as well. And the reason that's expanded over the last few years, and we've put the design capacity into that, is that we see a lot of offsite modularity coming into the build, and that's the key driver as well. As I said, engineering resource on site, even from a main contractor, M&E contractor point of view, does become a bottleneck, and anything you can do to get quality, skilled labour, continuity of supply, speed to deploy, all of those elements, from our point of view, is something that's a huge driver in the industry. And as the demand goes up, the more speed to deploy and the more capacity that's needed, the more it ties into the fact of doing as much offsite in a modular, pre-constructed, clean environment as possible. Really ties into that business model of making it quick, easy, and sustainable as well. So you can actually do a full sustainability report for a product that's offsite. Much more difficult if you're bringing in piecemeal UPS system switchboards on site. So there's an element there as well where you can actually give a much better granular way of understanding what the whole embedded carbon supply chain is at that particular point, rather than having to then go into the details with site works and that element.
Okay, and finally, perhaps a little bit greedy of me, if that's the right word, bearing in mind you've given me details of a lot of activity that Vertiv has undertaken in recent months, but clearly new year, I don't know if there are any sort of roadmap highlights you can share, or if it's all under wraps until you launch or announcing. Just any thoughts, as you say, where Vertiv is going this year, or will you continue as it sound, what you said earlier, you're very much spotting and developing product solutions or expanding capacity to address the key pain points. But yeah, just anything you can share as to Vertiv and the year ahead.
Yeah, sure. I can't say a huge amount, but I think it's I think we're offering a large variety of critical infrastructure. So we've mentioned the E&I acquisition, which added the LV, the MV, the busway to the offering. We have the cooling, we have all the integrated solutions which are in the IT space as well. We have the full product offering as well. So it's about offering that full product offerings for the critical environment to the clients as well. And the business is taking steps to make sure that we can, one, supply what's required to the industry, and that's steps we've taken for the last period of time to make sure we have this capacity, and so we can actually capitalize on the demand as well. We're continuing to develop new technologies as well. We touched on a couple of these points earlier. Power is going to become very, very key. So reducing the power consumption of the products, making the product more energy efficient, is a key one that we're always looking to design and develop. The acquisition that we've just made, as you mentioned, with regard to the Coolterra portfolio, that gives us a well-rounded liquid cooling element to the offering as well. And we want to make sure that from a sustainability point of view, that we're one of the market leaders as well. So we're looking at, with regard to the embedded carbon in the supply chain, we're looking at how green the company is as well. And we're taking all of those steps that really give us the offering that when we come and sit in front of clients, we can offer the full product portfolio, the full support around that particular offering, the service offering, so when the product becomes live on site, but also we're a sustainable business, which is ticking the box, because as we touched on at the beginning of the conversation, that's a massive driver and should be a massive driver in the industry as well.
Okay, I say we've taken plenty of your time. It'd be good to catch up again and maybe not leave it so long on my behalf so that you don't have to give me so much time next time. But at least now it's been great to catch up and some brilliant information, explanations to what's going on at Vertiv in the industry. So Sam, really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks, Philip.